So we're moving from kind of your modified independent stuff here, not so much the pacer, but the walkers and the rollator, and we're moving into more dependent. This is more, we're talking more about transferring here. The first piece of equipment, the Rifton changing station, isn't really a lift, but it's kind of bridging that gap. It allows people to kind of be changed in a semi-standing or standing position, and a person should have some ability to weight bear, and it allows them to do so. And I know it's kind of a weird wording, but it's nice to be able to let people do a little weight bearing. It's good for venous return. Again, like Anne Marie was saying, there's some evidence that it helps with bone strength overall.
Strong evidence.
Yeah, strong evidence. And we have these in a lot of our adult activity centers. I haven't seen too many in community homes or ICFs, but it's kind of a neat tool if you have someone who's kind of in that intermediate range of ability, because you don't need to involve a mechanical lift. It's more of a sit to stand transfer, and again, it allows people to be more active in their own self-care. So why lifts? How many people are in here are in direct care who are actually hands-on helping people with their ADLs? Yeah, so a good chunk of the group, right? So why don't we use lifts? It seems like I see a lot of people in the homes not using lifts, right? Because it's time consuming, right? But some reasons to use lifts. It reduces the risk of injury to both you and your consumer. So we're reducing MUIs, we're reducing workman's comp claims. We know that staffing homes can be a very difficult issue too. So if we reduce injuries, there's less scheduling conflicts, less missed days. So it can really benefit those in the management too. And there are lifts for every need. And like I said, using a lift takes longer than it does to manually lift someone. But what we talked about earlier was this repetitive use kind of injury, lifting people over and over again manually. It's going to take its toll on your body. So whether or not you plan on staying in direct care as a career, or if it's a stop along your career development, there can be lasting effects to manually lifting people over months and years. Allow yourself a little extra time, because it is going to take some extra time. So general lift safety, we want to always inspect our equipment before we go about using it. Make sure that your straps aren't frayed, that your hydraulics on a mechanical lift aren't leaking. Just make sure all your fasteners are there, that's holding the thing together. And then we also want to plan our transfers. Those of you that have used lift, has you ever gone halfway through and then you're like, oh my gosh, there's all this stuff on the floor, where I'm going to put, there's someone left a sweatshirt in their wheelchair that I'm transferring them into. So before you get into the whole lifting process, make sure your path is clear. Make sure that you know that the surface you're transferring onto is clear. And as going down into the actual use of the lifts, as Paul Miles was talking about earlier, you hear a lot of people locking the wheels on the lift, but typically what we would recommend is locking your wheelchair in place and then leaving the lift free to move, because then it will self-center under the individual. If you lock both and you're not centered correctly over the individual, you'll get like a swing. So kind of leaving the floor lift free to self-center is a good idea. For the overhead ceiling lifts, you don't really need to lock anything, because again, the ceiling lift will self-center, and it'll also allow the chair to kind of come underneath if you aren't directly under your tracking. So the are the seatbelt, is the seatbelt off? Are the foot straps off? And then we also want to make sure that the sling is free and clear, and that arm isn't stuck under an armrest, because you can really cause serious injury both, to the individual, and you could cause damage to their transportation device. And then the last tip is communicate what you're doing and listen to your consumer. So many of our consumers might not be verbal, but this is kind of a social, emotional component. Most of our individuals who require this level of assistance have received it their whole lives, but we also got to remember that they're people and not objects to just be moved. So always give a person the benefit of the doubt, that they understand what's going on, and that you're acknowledging them as a person, giving them warning. Hey, we're going to lift you on 3, and if they are verbal, listen to what they're saying, right? So and then give assurances when they're up, and always request help if you feel like you need it. Most of these devices, the manufacturers will say they're for use by one individual. They recommend 2, but it is doable to use these with one person. But if you're not feeling comfortable, err on the side of caution. Ask for help, and as a manager, be understanding of that if you're in that position. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. We received in-service during one of our OTPT meetings from Rifton, and again, it's a transfer and mobility system. Rifton, I think, would recommend other products if you were strictly looking at gait training and pacing, but this is a nice kind of Swiss Army knife of a device. It can accomplish a lot of different tasks. The standing lift, Paul Miles kind of went through this. We remember kind of got the knee blocks, and then the person can involve their upper extremities going from sit to stand. These can be nice because they can be left in place if you're doing transfer to the toilet, and it can kind of provide additional stability there. And again, we're allowing the person that's able to be a little more active in their self-care and a little more active in their transfers. This is the tram, a little out of place. Again, the retail cost is pretty high. And it's nice if the person is either has good upper body control or is a little higher toned. Not really great for a low toned upper body. So we're going into slings, and slings would be used with both the over the head ceiling track lift system and then also the floor model lifts. Kind of going into ease of putting them on and then taking them off. This looks kind of like a hybrid it's a small split leg sling. They also make a lift or a sling that I'm not sure if we have it on site, but it's called a toileting dressing sling, and it goes under the arms and around the chest, and then it just has the two leg pads, and it's really nice for getting on and off. I think one of the reasons caregivers don't use lifts is because of the sling placement and how difficult it can be. So if a person has like a higher tone, a little more upper body control, the toileting dressing slings are something to look into. They're not covered items by Medicare, Medicaid, but if the person has waiver or some community funds available, they can be pursued. Split leg slings, they're also, which is more like this, they're also not covered by Medicare, Medicaid, but they're a little easier to don than the covered full body sling. And I think a lot of us as therapists will recommend the split leg slings as opposed to the full body slings. And we can work on funding for that for those with DD and see if we can get approval. And then the slings always come in mesh or solid. The mesh is typically for bathing. It allows the sling to dry quicker. So one of the major concerns with mobile floor lifts is seeing people use them as a transport device instead of just a transfer device. Typically, I want to go from one surface to another, almost like the stand pivot transfer. I would use the lift to transfer a person from their from like the toilet back to their chair, or from their bed to their wheelchair. But going through doorways can be tricky because typically you want to expand the base as wide as you can to give yourself the greatest base of support. These lifts can be difficult for people with behavioral issues too, if they're not willing to cooperate with the transfer. I've seen people push off of the riser column, and it can push them outside the base of support, and it can be a little bit of a danger. The benefits of these are that they are portable, so you're not defined to your ceiling track area. This lift, which we would typically all call a Hoyer lift, is just a manual hydraulic floor lift. The real benefit of this is that it's a covered lift for people with qualifying conditions, but can be difficult to operate with one user because you're managing both the individual and the lift, having to pump it up, and then once you get to your surface, releasing the hydraulics so they can go back down. But doable, but again, you might recommend having 2 people to use. Paul showed us earlier the powered floor lift. They're great, but also not covered, and they're quite costly. So the pros of the standard floor lifts are that they're great on hard surfaces. They're flexible. You can go from room to room, be used with multiple consumers, and they're great for those who are dependent with transfers. The problem is they don't work very well on carpeting. It can be tricky to move them around. Even doing that 90-degree pivot can be difficult on carpeting, and they also need clearance for the base, so they don't work with tub or shower transfers, which can be difficult. So if that's our concern, we might look at ceiling track lift systems. Again, we were shown that earlier. These can be very nice. They're very costly though, and not covered by insurance. These are great because you can either go under the door headers or they can cut through door headers, so they can be used as transport systems too. So we can go from the bedroom to the bathroom, or I've even seen some people use short runs as a way of gaining a little gait training activity, and very expensive. Even the tracking, I think, is about, for like a 8-foot stick, it's about $500 or something. I think that's what one of the lift installers told me.